is it possible to connect Mesopotamian cuneiform clay tablets, the inventor Thomas Edison, and baleen whales' earwax? And why would we want to? In connecting them, how can they encourage us to consider our human legacy and the traces we are leaving behind, whilst generating new ideas and inviting a deeper connection to the natural world? My name is Kate Ive, and I'm an artist and researcher. Through my sculpture-based practice, I explore our anthropogenic impact on the Earth and our legacy through record-making and record-keeping, focusing on developing alternative systems to store data in a personal, tangible, and artistic way. Over the past few years, I've been working with data scientists, archaeologists, and wide-ranging ocean and environmental datasets. I've examined how we can encode data to create new records and recordings with varying levels of permanence and physicality. I have sought to develop innovative ways of storing and interacting with important environmental datasets to reimagine how data might be used, extruding it into new forms. Most recently, I've been experimenting with handmade processes to create new artwork to enable greater connection, engagement, and access to globally significant information relating to the health of the ocean and the planet. I have been developing an evolving system to translate numerical datasets into unique geometric sequences and patterns, which I carve and embed into the surface of my sculptures to create what I like to call sculptural recordings. Wide-ranging data is encoded and stored in handmade pieces. An example of this can be seen in the blue forms on the left of the screen. Each piece contains and stores data relating to an individual topic exploring ocean health and were selected in collaboration with an ocean data scientist. From left to right, the sculptures store data on the role of phytoplankton, coral bleaching, chemical pollution in the ocean, deep-sea mining, ocean acidification, and the projected future for Antarctic krill. They are part of a larger body of work, and I made them at the European Ceramic Work Centre in the Netherlands during a 3-month artist residency. Their forms draw inspiration from antiquity. Specifically, their forms are taken from the etching on the right, which is in the Welcome Trust of historic Roman lacrimatories. Roman lacrimatories are small vessels that may have been used by the Romans to store their tears during periods of mourning and grief. Whilst it's difficult to say for sure if the Romans really used the bottles in this way, this made them an appropriate choice to contain data that overall reveals the serious condition of the ocean and our anthropogenic impact. We humans have long been leaving evidence of our presence, and this really took a turn with the development of cuneiform, a script which allowed the first written records to be made over 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. With clay dug from the earth and formed into tablets, information could now be stored and retained using wedge-shaped hand tools made from reeds to embed clay with cuneiform writing. Record making inevitably leads to record keeping, both short and long term, and the accumulation of these clay tablets created the first libraries and archives. These two examples on the right of the screen are held in the British Museum collections. They're both made from clay and have been embedded with cuneiform script. The top image is of a late Babylonian tablet that records astrological omens. The bottom tablet is older and from the late Uruk period, from between 3,100 and 3000 BC, which interestingly and very importantly was a record of beer and shows 5 different types of numerical symbol. Recording omens and the quantities of beer paints an interesting picture of Mesopotamian life, 5,000 or so years ago. But these are just 2 snapshots of a vast collection of surviving tablets, recording a huge variety of topics, and the tablets themselves were largely left unfired. My research and artwork draws inspiration from these tablets and the cylinder seals, bringing together the techniques and materials of these earliest records and introducing them to contemporary data to create new sculptural recordings. The Mesopotamians themselves recycled their clay records. Sun-baking them meant that the records could be soaked and dissolved down, recycled and reused once they'd served their purpose. This is something I'm embracing in my own artwork. The experimental clay core sculpture on the left is embedded with ocean data. Leaving it unfired allows me to question how long our footprints should last. By beginning to make my sculptures in unfired clay, I reduce my energy and material consumption, creating work that could last thousands of years, given the right conditions and circumstances, but also might break down and be destroyed next week, depending on the shape, scale, and fragility. This allows me to both improve the sustainability of my practice and existentially question, who am I making my work for, and when am I making it for, considering what is the lifetime of the piece? I should say that while the original Mesopotamian record makers and keepers did not incorporate firing their tablets into their practice unless they were of particular importance, some cuneiform tablets have subsequently been fired by museums as a conservation method to ensure the preservation of fragile tablets. For example, the top tablet was fired in 1967, a long time after it was created. So, how to connect Mesopotamian tablets and Thomas Edison? Well, we've looked at some of the earliest records made with written script. Since then, humans have developed some truly astonishing ways of creating records and documenting events and information since then. Thomas Edison was one of them, inventing his phonograph to create early sound recordings, and another great inspiration in my artwork. Edison's phonograph used a diaphragm and a needle to etch sound patterns onto wax cylinders, depicted in the wood engraving on the right from the Welcome Trust. This links with my sculpture recordings in a number of ways. Edison's phonograph was hand-cranked and cut very intricate grooves into the surface of the wax, creating a record of the sound. I have built a lathe that I hand-turn and use to accurately store my geometric data patterns in the surface of my work. Once I've translated numerical environmental datasets into unique geometrically patterned sequences, I carve them into wax to preserve them, before transforming the wax into clay. One of my wax models is shown here on the left in blue. Edison's phonograph recordings could be played back to hear the original stored sounds, and this led me to question the need for interaction and playback within my own work. Up until this point in the project, the environmental data was essentially trapped in the sculptural recording, captured and stored, but inaccessible and unreadable by the viewer. Whilst considering the philosophical sound of a tree falling in a forest in relation to experiencing data and whether it's important to release the data from the sculptural recordings so it can be understood, it was immediately clear that given the importance of current environmental data, making it accessible was the key next step in my work. This required developing new ways to read and understand the datasets. For the viewer to decode, decipher, and grapple with the significance of what is embedded and stored in the surface of my sculptures. Lacrimatory 4, on the left, stores data that catalogues and records ocean acidification, with datasets that cover the change in pH over 100 years, projected until 2090. This piece also stores information on the impact of ocean acidification on marine species, and what it means for creatures like the sea butterfly, which is projected, sadly, to take 45 days to dissolve in ocean water in the year 2100, less than 80 years from now due to increased ocean acidity. This is happening in the place that the sea butterfly and marine snail is supposed to be able to call home, as it has evolved specifically to swim in open water, away from the shoreline. The precarious uncertainty of the sea butterfly's future is just one example of a particularly worrying aspect of the ocean's current and future health. Looking for ways to make this data and information accessible, decoding it from my ceramic sculptural recordings, I look for scientific approaches for visualizing information. I began exploring the use of annotated drawings as one way to share the data behind my geometrically patterned sequences. The experimental silkscreen print on the right contains some of the ocean acidification data and information that is stored in the ceramic sculpture on the left, as if viewed from above. The patterns in the drawing and on the ceramic can be matched up together, so individual data bands can be identified. Each horizontal pattern band in the ceramic piece and each line in the drawing correlate and represent one individual piece of data. With 2D drawings forming one tangible method of decoding the data in my work, I wanted to explore what digital technologies could offer to support further in-depth interaction with such urgent environmental data. I'm currently working with Edinburgh University, their Creative Informatics Department, and Creative Edinburgh as part of their Connected Innovators programme, to build an augmented reality app that will allow viewers to access the data stored in my sculptures by scanning them with their mobile phones, something I feel might have interested Thomas Edison. To create the AR app, I needed to begin cataloguing all the sculptures that were to become part of the database for the app, and to create 3D models of my ceramic sculptural recordings. Photogrammetry is being used to create these models, using a mobile phone to capture and stitch together hundreds of photos per sculpture to create accurate 3D models. An example of which is visible in the video on the screen showing Lacrimatory 2. These 3D models are then used to generate model targets that the app can access to recognize the individual forms and identify which sculpture the viewer is looking at, in order to connect the viewer with the appropriate associated data for each piece. From there, they will be free to interactively dig into the sculptures and see what the data they contain. Lacrimatory 2 on screen explores the significant role that phytoplankton plays in sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the depths of the ocean for deep storage. This is an important role in the ocean's biological pump. As they grow, the phytoplankton take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then when they die, they rain down through the ocean to the deep like marine snow, taking carbon dioxide and nutrients with them, and helping to mix the ocean's stratified layers. I think we can agree these tiny microscopic marine plants are a very important part and play a very important role in the essential storage of carbon dioxide in the ocean, and they're important in future projections for climate change. This is the AR app currently in development. I'm building it using Vuforia and Unity 3D with support through the Connected Innovators programme. By using the app to scan my sculptures with a mobile phone, the viewer triggers pop-ups and interactive information and content that allows them to deep dive into the data and gain access to further resources. As I mentioned before, each of the pieces of data are represented by individual horizontal bands which are stacked on top of each other like stratified layers. The data is encoded in geometrically patterned sequences that are carved and embedded in the surface of my ceramic sculptural recordings. The user will be able to select the individual data bands in the ceramic sculpture recordings through the app, allowing them to explore the data. Presented in this way, it will make the selected environmental data clear and unforgettable, especially when the sculptures are all viewed together collectively. Our anthropogenic impact is undeniable. It is important to point out, though, that not all the data reflects a bleak future. The data selected for the sculptures is wide-ranging, and in some cases shows successful recovery and improvement. This is an ongoing project and currently in development. Once the app is up and running, the next stage will be to exhibit the sculptures and make the app publicly available. The app will also allow remote access for visitors who are unable to experience the sculptures in person. Continuing to work with data scientists and expanding the reach of the project through further discussions and collaborations will explore how it might bring new, wider-ranging data to life. So, I've drawn these connections between Mesopotamian cuneiform clay tablets, Edison's early sound recordings, my sculptural recordings storing environmental data and how that information can be accessed. That only leaves us with whales' earwax to discuss. My personal interest in the storage and interpretation of environmental data was piqued when I read a study on whales' earwax. Whales' earwax might sound like an unusual source of inspiration, and it is, but it's also a deeply fascinating one. One study of particular interest was led by researchers at Baylor University in America that examined baleen whales' earwax plugs that are generated during the course of a whale's life and store huge amounts of information in bands of light and dark earwax. A bit like tree rings, a whale's earwax plug not only reveals how old the whale was when it died, but contains other very useful information too, from the sentinels of the ocean. The researchers looked at earwax plugs from humpback, fin, and blue whales and created datasets spanning 146 years. Peeling back the layers in each earwax sample, the researchers were able to see the variations in the whale's cortisol levels and consider what might be causing elevated periods of stress. Spanning 146 years of stress in whales understandably revealed the impact of the whaling industry, along with environmental pollutants and other stressors, which today include ocean noise and chemical pollution, food shortages, busy shipping lanes, and fatal entanglements, just to name a few. Richard Sabin, Principal Curator of Mammals at the Natural History Museum in London, kindly shared this image with me in the top right of an earwax plug from a fin whale that died in 1953. Sadly, whales' earwax is only available after death, and the banded pattern can be most clearly seen on the right-hand side, which suggests that the fin whale was more than 50 years old when it died. The image on the left is a digital model for a new piece of my artwork, a new sculptural recording, that will look to store data collected from whales' earwax plugs, which, when paired with a means of decoding the sculpture, will reveal the intimate lives of the whales included and our impact upon them. Record making and keeping has changed dramatically from the early written records of cuneiform clay tablets, and it's almost inconceivable the technological advancements at our disposal to track and record not just globally significant data, but also data from our own personal daily lives. In 2021, 79 zettabytes of data were generated, which is expected to rise to over 150 zettabytes of data by 2025. So whilst we've come a long way from the Mesopotamians' recording techniques, we too are clearly avid record makers and keepers, even if we don't personally think about our generated data in these terms. We've looked together at a few carefully selected examples that explore the art of record making and keeping, along with my own personal approach to using data, turning it into sculptural recordings that I create in order to both store and contain environmental data, whilst highlighting and revealing its urgent information. I started this talk by asking a question, and I'd like to leave you now by asking another. The question I leave you with is this: what do we want our records to say about us now? How we've lived our lives, and how we've left our mark. If you'd like to know more about my work, you can find me on Instagram or visit me at www.ktive.co.uk. Thank you very much.